Recently, I had the fortune of spending time with Ed from Minisodes. We hung out, talked hobby, and played a game of 2nd edition Warhammer 40k. In this video, I'll talk you through my unforgettable experience. I imagine it is a creator milestone to be asked to do a collaboration. So a few months ago, when Ed reached out to me, I couldn't say no to his kind offer. The chance to meet the legend himself and play 40k against his Tyranids. Who could say no? And especially since Ed was a major inspiration for my own channel. His Oldhammer content, including his painting up of the entire 2nd edition box set, encouraged me to pursue similar retro projects of my own. But I didn't want to steal his thunder. When I first made preparations for Miniscape, I reached out to Ed to ask if he didn't mind me making the channel, especially since the name of mine started with the same prefix. Thankfully, Ed was receptive to the idea. So, I guess if there's anyone to thank for the content I have put out, it's Ed. We stayed in touch regularly, and as my Ultramarines grew in size, Ed sent me a proposal. A Warhammer 40k 2nd edition game. My Ultramarines versus his Tyranids from the same era. The grudge match of the millennium. And it fitted with the lore too. 40k lore states that the Ultramarines, at great cost to themselves, defeated High Fleet Behemoth during the First Tyrannic War. It was such an important event that Games Workshop themed their 4th edition starter set for Warhammer 40,000 around these events, and called it the Battle for Macragge. With the lore fitting our 2nd edition collections, it seemed the stars had aligned for Ed and I. Therefore, we decided our game should reenact an engagement from the Battle of Macragge. And given the models in my collection, what better fight to choose than the valiant last stand of the Ultramarines' first company at the Polar Fortress? We decided on a 1500 point game. It seems to be the sweet spot among players of 2nd edition. And we concluded early on that this should be, as far as possible, a narrative game. I'm not saying we were going to stick rigidly to the lore, since, as you will discover later, sources differ on the account of the battle. On the other hand, neither of us wanted to wipe the floor with the other, and we agreed that decisions made should allow for the most riveting drama possible. In the lore, the role of the Ultramarines veterans was to slow down the seemingly endless Tyranid advance long enough to allow Marneus Calgar and the fleet to annihilate Tyranid bioships in orbit. To represent this, we chose the special mission from the Tyranid Codex, Tyranid Attack, which we modified slightly. The mission allows for Tyranid units to be recycled endlessly. Specifically, as soon as enough models have been killed that could form a new game-legal brood. That brood can come on as reinforcements at the start of the next turn, if the Nid player rolls correctly. The new Nid brood would come on the next turn on a roll of a 2 or more on a d6. When we rolled for where the brood would appear, on a 1 or a 2, the brood would come on Ed's board edge. On a 3 or a 4, the brood would come on slightly closer through a doorway on the left-hand side of the table from my perspective. On a 5 or a 6, the brood would come on even closer, almost on top of my deployment zone. And if altogether that sounds scary, try being the guy fighting against it. It basically gives Ed endless points against my 1500. The objectives for this mission are, for the Tyranid player, the entire opposing army must be annihilated. And for the defender, in this case me as the Ultramarines, the objective is to survive 6 turns, although we reduced it to 5 given our limited time. To make life harder, I agreed to split my force in 2. Roughly 1,000 points would set up in my deployment zone, which is the force that is holding the Polar Fortress against the invaders. The remaining 500 or so would arrive later as a relief force. The 1,000 point force was led by Captain Saul Invictus, he was accompanied by a bodyguard of 5 Terminators. His special rule allows these Terminators to each take a war gear card, so I chose to give the Assault Cannon Terminator armor-piercing rounds, which changes the save modifier to -6. The Sergeant has a bionic arm, giving him +1 strength in melee. Next was a veteran squad, consisting of a flamer and missile launcher. The squad was split into 2 combat squads, one led by a librarian Codicia, and another by Chaplain Cassius, who was pretty important since he mitigates the fear effect of the Tyranids. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, certain creatures in 2nd edition 40k invoked fear in their enemies, for example if they wanted to charge or were charged by the fear-causing creature. Passing a leadership test would mean that they act normally, but failing meant they would break. In hand-to-hand combat, weapon skill would be halved if a break test was failed in such a way. So Cassius negates fear by Tyranids, plus he has an aura that confers a reroll on leadership tests. A handy chap to have one's back. Of course, Space Marines have the Shaken special rule, which gives them extra stickability that other troops don't have, but now isn't the time to discuss the interplay between these 2 rules. The last unit in this 1000 point force is a twin-linked heavy bolter Tarantula and its servitor operator. The second half of my army, the relief force, included Marneus Calgar, a 5-man combat squad of tactical marines, a dreadnought armed with a power fist and multi-melter, a tech marine, and finally a hero we named Pablo Doublehard, who was painted by Ed. Pablo and the combat squad were not in the original army list, but Ed insisted I chuck them in anyways, and who was I to refuse a few more Space Marines? Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Marneus Calgar was not present at the battle. What in the name of Macragge were you thinking? Well, we were thinking about using as many special characters as we could and having a blast. That is a hill I'm prepared to die on, and if I die up there in the company of Calgar, then all the better, my friends. So, to summarise, I had to survive endless hordes of Tyranids, with starting points less than Ed's, but the Nids do not know mercy, and I would certainly not give them any. The law said all the first company died, including Sol Invictus, but they gave their lives to save the planet and ultimately many more planets most likely. I had spent months building my Ultramarines force. This was finally my chance to use it. Now before I mention the outcome of the game, and my thoughts in the aftermath, do go to Minisodes and watch Ed's battle report. Don't worry, I'll wait. So, I suppose we embarked upon the journey to tell an alternative history of these events, what with Calgar being present in our version. Sources differ on how the battle played out in the actual lore, and I confess now this is not an extensive overview of the accounts and their divergence, just the summary of my findings from the sources I own. The following is a summary of the account in Codex Tyranids from 2nd edition. A large space battle takes place between Calgar's fleet and Tyranid bioships from High Fleet Behemoth. However, thousands of spores make it to the fortresses at the north and south poles of Macragge, which were the keystones to the Ultramarines' defence. Calgar gives chase as the Hive ships retreat, confident the polar fortresses are well protected by the Ultramarines' First Company. Though the Tyranid losses were many, falling to artillery and bolter shell alike, the attackers steadily pushed the defenders deeper into the polar fortresses. Even Titans were dragged down by the sheer weight of numbers of the Tyranids. In space, Calgar pursued the Tyranid fleet to the planet Circe, whatever. There he was reinforced by the Tempestus fleet, leading to a titanic fleet battle. The Nids were defeated when the Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra detonated her warp drive in the heart of the Tyranid fleet. Calgar returned to Macragge to relieve the polar garrisons, who were forced deep underground at the North Pole. By then, the First Company detachments at the southern polar fortress had been wiped out. The Third Company of the Ultramarines landed to relieve the forces at the Northern Pole, with whom contact had been lost. With the support of dreadnoughts, Third Company squads cut through the Tyranid forces already there, taking significant losses in the process. A Tyranid Lord, presumably a Hive Tyrant, engages one dreadnought in hand-to-hand combat. With the aid of Captain Fabian, the creature is defeated, but the Tyranid counterattack continued, their slaughter somewhat blunted by the psychic blasts from their librarian as the Ultramarines were on the verge of being overwhelmed. The remnants of the Third Company advanced with flamers to the lower penetorium of the Polar Fortress, where the First Company had made their last stand. To a man, the entire First Company had been wiped out, their bodies surrounded by their dead foes in piles 6 deep. And then there's the account in Codex Tyranids from 4th edition. What's interesting here is the added detail of Calgar's arrival at Macragge. This is left out in the earlier codex, which states that Calgar's fleet limped behind while the 3rd and 7th companies surged forward to relieve the 1st. The later codex includes a paragraph saying that Calgar and the surviving battle brothers find scenes of unbelievable carnage, piles of mangled alien corpses, steaming craters where Titan reactors had gone critical. Other than that, the close of the account remains the same. There are other sources, of course, and the website Lexicanum tries to summarize them. One notable difference, it states, is a fight between Calgar and the Swarmlord at the Battle of Cold Steel Ridge. The Swarmlord almost kills Calgar, who is rescued by his honor guard, who is then airlifted to the battle barge Octavius in orbit to recover. And I am sure there are other accounts that omit some details and include others. I suppose that is to be expected for a universe as vast as, and with such a longevity as, Warhammer 40,000. So how did our battle compare? Well, Ed's Tyranids failed to wipe out my Ultramarines after 5 turns. We could have played a 6th, but agreed it wouldn't have made much difference. The Terminators were wiped out by his Carnifex by turn 3, though Saul Invictus stood his ground after he was charged by the Carnifex. At this point, there were 2 turns of a wound here and a wound there, but suffice it to say, Invictus held his own against the otherwise unstoppable Carnifex. And while we are on that subject, what a beast that Carnifex was. His 3+ save on 2d6 was insane enough, but Ed equipped it with a voltage field, giving it an additional 4+ and modifiable save. As a result, he tanked an incredible number of shots that would easily have felled a less impressive beast. In hindsight, I would shoot it less and try to bog it down sooner. By the end of the battle, I did have some veterans left, holding their own against a Tyranid warrior. I expect they would have beaten him next turn, and then hosed down some more termagants. Due to the nature of the late arrival, Calgar and the Dreadnought didn't get to do much except hold the Genestealers at bay, which can't be underestimated really, since those things are murder houses in combat. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Should I be scared of Genestealers?
Yes, you should be terrified.
We were discussing in which turn to bring in the relief force. However, we decided to play it by ear rather than let the dice decide. Too early, and they would have halted the Tyranid advance before it got started. After all, we did want some drama for Ed's battle report. Notable mentions are the Tarantula, which did a fine job of thinning the rampaging horde. They spray out 4 to 12 shots per turn, though with a risk of jamming. But man, did it kill a lot of nids before it jammed. The second legend here was the missile launcher guy who almost killed 2 monsters. Were it not for the voltage field, the missile launcher would have downed the Carnifex. However, he did earn his stripes when his crack missile killed the Hive Tyrant. For that honour, I have named him Brother Marcus Faust, and given him a special medal to honour his success. The Codicer was a very useful pick, since he pretty much eliminated a squad of hiding Genestealers with the Psychic Power Smite on the first turn. In a previous video, I raised the point that veterans were worth it due to their higher ballistic skill. I can say now, I found that mostly hitting on 2s in shooting was very useful indeed. I'm glad I took them. Another thing that surprised me this game was Ed's Venom Cannon, wielded by one of his Tyranid warriors. It uses the Thud Gun template, which is a first for me to experience in a game of 2nd edition. Man, those rules are better on paper than in reality. It's a rather a hit or miss kind of weapon, no pun intended. But on the turn it did work. It blew apart my Terminator with the assault cannon. One thing I really appreciate on Ed's part was the setup of the table. He had used his terrain effectively to provide an immersive experience. The use of cake toppers for the pillars really made me feel like we were fighting in an indoor fortress, which was already ruined from the prior Tyranid onslaught. The door in the walls on the left side of the board gave the impression that this was just one room in a vast catacomb. As a kid, I played Warhammer with VHS tapes and books for terrain, and my miniatures were a tide of unpainted grey. I can tell you now, the fully painted armies and beautiful terrain doesn't half level up the gaming experience. Overall, this was an unforgettable experience, the sum of a dramatic and immersive game, along with Ed's stellar hospitality and sportsmanship. But we didn't just leave with an awesome experience. I gifted Ed a canvas I painted of his gorgeous cat Buffy, while he blessed me with his beautiful Ultramarine in errant armour. I really hope we can do something similar again someday. Until next time, Ed. Take care, everyone, and thanks for watching.